Just to give you a little background on myself, I got my start working with this guy a long time ago, Ted Nelson. He was working at Autodesk, and he was working on this distributed hypertext system that was going to be this worldwide hypertext system that, it was a crazy idea that someone anywhere in the world could go get a piece of content from somewhere else in the world, and it would all be connected up to each other. And unfortunately, it wasn't the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee was working on it at the same time. That actually turned out to be much more successful. But the point of the story really is, I saw this opportunity to meet somebody who was really interesting and influential, and I took it. I didn't get permission to do that, right? Like, I think we're in a time of unprecedented access. Just because you're off in Latvia does not mean that you now have access to the entire world through the internet. You have a bunch of people who came here, and you can go there. But again, the point of the story was I saw this opportunity to work with somebody who was really insightful, and I learned a lot from that experience. I went on to work at Wired magazine on a thing called Hotwired, which was really the first commercial internet site. We invented the banner ad, for which I apologize. But it did create a commercial opportunity for all of us, and part of the reason that we're here is because that you can make money on the internet. I saw this new nascent technology called Java really early, back in 1995. I thought that was going to be huge. Wrote the first client-server application in Java a long time ago. To touch on something that Sean was talking about, he talked about being at MySpace and how they were the huge social network at the time. Of course, I was employee number 3 at Friendster, chief architect there, which was the thing that was, like this is, talking about failures, this was a huge failure. Really huge. We had like 110 million users. And we thought the social networking thing was going to be really huge. And of course it was, just not for us. One thing that was more successful, I went and became VP of Technology at Pivotal Labs, which is a global consultancy doing agile software development. There I got to meet Joy Ito, who now runs the Media Lab at MIT. And speaking of Singapore, the Singaporean government also asked him how to create entrepreneurship there. And I think there's a lot to learn from the Singaporean model. They also tried to put a lot of government money into startups, and that was successful to some extent, and they have created a startup ecosystem, but they also created a class of people who just wanted to be entrepreneurs, what Eric Ries calls the wantrepreneur. You have to actually really want to build something, build meaningful value in the world for it to even be worth bothering. From there, though, I ended up as CTO at Digital Garage, which is the company that he started. It's a Japanese investment company. Ended up spending a bunch of time talking to Eric Ries, whose birthday I'm missing for you. It's today. I was supposed to go to his party, but I had already agreed to come here, and I would have. And I started a company called Neo, and you were asking about that, Dagny. It's basically a consultancy trying to help large enterprises to act like startups, because there's been this huge inversion in the world where the business world understands that real innovation happens through entrepreneurship. I also got to work with these guys. Beautiful house. They have a beautiful house. On something called the U.S. Digital Services Playbook. I only have a few edits in there, but even the federal government of the United States is looking to entrepreneurial models to try to create value. I do a lot of hardware mentoring. I do a lot of venture and advising, and as Dagny mentioned, I'm now a CTO at Paratherapeutics, which is in the behavioral health space. And I will mention that there's a lot of areas outside of just pure technology that I think are really interesting to look at. And I think synthetic biology is just starting to happen, and I think Latvia is well positioned to look at some of that stuff. Hardware is also just starting to happen. So who are you? Are you entrepreneurs? Can I see a show of hands? Investors? Wow, that's a great ratio. This is a much better ratio than we have in San Francisco. You should go gang up on these guys and make sure that you get some money from them. Students? You can also be any of those other things. So let's talk briefly then about talent. This may cause flashbacks if you've been in dysfunctional teams, so I apologize. And this is sort of the cops thing. This is based on a true story. Names have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty. It all started with a phone call. I've been advising a bunch, and I got this call about somebody wanting to replace their CTO. And I thought, that's really scary. I don't want to be that CTO next. There's sort of the classic, the 3 envelopes story, the story of the entrepreneur who, the new CTO comes in and the outgoing CTO gives them 3 envelopes. And the idea is, okay, as the new CTO, you have the solution to all your problems are in these 3 envelopes. Open them in order as you have a problem. So first crisis comes up and he opens the envelope and it says, blame the previous administration. And he does, and it all gets better. And then there's another crisis, a little longer, and then blame unexpected situation. And so he does this, and it's also, resolves the problem. And he gets to the 3rd envelope, and it says, make out 3 envelopes. So I didn't want to be in that situation. So I went in and I said, look, I don't want to just jump in and be your CTO, but I will come and help and figure out what's going on. It turns out that the problem was real. There was a real problem with the structure of how the team was operating. They weren't shipping code. There was there was a lot of sort of control of knowledge. There was a lot of what we call knowledge silos. These are silos, but do people know what a knowledge silo is? Basically, the idea is you keep knowledge separated and that one person knows one thing and another person knows another thing. And these are really picturesque silos. The problem is silos are really dangerous. They're more dangerous like this kind of a silo. You can cause all sorts of problems by people not knowing where the information is. There were a lot of process smells. There was estimation that was incorrect. There was no real sense of where they were in the project, when things were going to ship. And again, they hadn't shipped anything in 6 months, even though they were consistently about 2 weeks away. So I said, okay, this is a real problem. I think I can help. I decided to dive in. Really, the first thing to do was to try to stop the bleeding, right? There's clearly a problem. What do you do? The first thing, in order to stop the bleeding, is really to triage and say, okay, what is the most broken thing? What is the thing that we absolutely have to solve today? And the fact is, coming into a new role, you can say, oh, this isn't working, I should start from scratch. But ultimately, you really have to go with the team that you have. The fastest way to get product out the door was to figure out how we take this team, patch things together, and ship a product. It turns out in this case, the quickest win that we could come up with was just having a continuous build. When I got there, this is not, in modern software, the idea of having a continuous build is kind of a given. We didn't have that. When I got there, it literally took 1 whole day to create a single build. And it not only did it take 1 day, but it took 3 different engineers. There was no one engineer on the team who could produce the product. So it took 2.5 weeks, which is crazy long, but we got a continuous build, and that took that time down to 5 minutes. With the result of which being, we could ship it. This is the ship it squirrel. There were other problems going on. There were people who were not a right fit for the team, so really trying to adjust for team fit. There were some changes that we made. We took a team, and over the course of the next 2 months, there are 4 people that are no longer on the team, and there's 1 new person who came into the team. But again, still basically the same team. The other big thing was to reduce complexity. They had managed to create a very complex, over-architected piece of software, too many tiers, too many layers, again, too many knowledge silos. This was a team of 8 people, and there were 20 different repos, 20 different source code chunks, all managed separately. Nobody knew where everything was. It just was completely unnecessary for where we were at the stage of the company. So what we ended up doing was deciding to rewrite actually the bulk of what was there. None of it was tested either. We would have these things, we'd have the whole application would completely break when some small change happened. So this was just not a maintainable code base. What we decided to do then was to do a rewrite, and then we had to decide what technology stack we wanted to implement in. Again, there were 20 repos. There were 8 different technologies used in the product at the time, and we wanted to consolidate down to a couple. So what we did was we had a bake-off. We got the engineers together. We looked at all the different technologies that were available to solve the problem that we were looking at. There were a number of them that were perfectly capable. But the most important thing as a manager to think about is not what's the best technology, but what's the best technology for the job? And what the best technology for the job is what's the best technology for the team that's doing the job. So we took 4 days. We looked at all these different technologies. We chose the 3 that we thought were best. We eliminated one of them because nobody was that interested in it. Again, they were all perfectly valid choices. And we actually implemented a whole bunch of the rewrite in 2 different implementation stacks. And we took one team, one with experience and one the person who was the least interested in doing it, and a couple other people, and they built one. And the same on the other side. The person who was the least interested in this other stack worked on that. And then we switched. We did 2 days on one and 2 days on the other. And at the end of this process, everybody, 1, had really good insight into what we were doing, and 2, was bought into that both of these technologies were viable, and 2, which one was a better fit for the team. And ultimately, it really speaks to the maturity of the team that when we got to the point of deciding, everybody kind of would have been fine with either, but ultimately people said, oh, if we do Node.js, it's going to be easier to hire developers. So I thought that really spoke to the extent that we had really good people on the team, but they just weren't being utilized effectively. And of course, thematically, the thing to take away as an entrepreneur is this is a real problem. This happens all the time. We also wanted to test everything. We wanted to make sure that everything was test-driven. Having good rigor in terms of software is important. We did a lot of pair programming, also to do knowledge transfer. But ultimately, these are the things that we did, and we took an underperforming team. And again, only by removing some people and only adding one person, we had this impact on the velocity of the team. So these charts, the red is the number of bugs fixed. There were a lot of bugs. Green is the amount of new feature development that happened. And again, just over the course of not very much time, we took this team that was kind of like this and turned it into this. That's the same dog. And the analogy is important. So let's take a look at this in numbers real quick. Before and after. At the beginning, 8 languages. At the end, 2 languages. And this is only because we had a mobile app and a back end. 20 repos versus 3 repos. The team size was 11, and we went down to a team size of 5. We got rid of also a consultant group that was producing code that we didn't like. Much smaller team, much greater output. Specifically, build time used to take 3 developers 1 day, and it went to 0 developers in 5 minutes. Obviously, a huge impact on efficiency. And then we took a velocity that was basically indetectable and turned it into 45 points a day. That's a whole other conversation about what points are. But obviously, huge impact on the product, and we managed to ship. So just a little theory to frame all this. By the way, that was Ono Taiichi who invented lean manufacturing at Toyota. His thing's all about reducing waste. So he has his 7 principles of how to reduce waste. I'll convert them into English for you. And these are great, and these are very much about manufacturing. I have my own version of this, which is really about waste in software development, unvalidated design, unpaid code debt, pre-optimization, time spent stuck or unfocused, duplication, over-design or over-architecture, and done not equaling done. And I'll talk about a few of these because they were very relevant in this product. There's a lot of unvalidated design. There was a lot of stuff where nobody had really looked at the games that we're building. These are all serious games about mental health. Nobody looked at what they were and saw that they were correct. There was a huge amount of what we call code debt. There was code that was untested, so that as soon as we tried to make any changes, we couldn't. There was a huge amount of over-design and over-architecture. We had big data analytics stuff, but no data. A lot of thought had gone into how do we make the scale to millions and millions of records, and we had 0 records. There's time for that later. But the biggest thing of all was that we had this problem with done not equaling done. We would have 20 stories started by a single developer, and they were all sort of waiting around to be finished. And so there was no business value being captured from each of these stories being finished. We were building stuff, but there was no actual use value until they're completed. So the single biggest thing, if you have one takeaway, is to make sure that people are finishing the stuff they start and not starting something new. Ultimately, your job as an entrepreneur is simple. It's to build the right team and then to get out of their way. Again, we had this team that was, it turns out, very capable, but they were so mismanaged that they weren't able to produce anything. I came in there fully expecting I was going to have to replace every single person on the team, and instead, they were out of this not very big team. I had 3 real superstars on this team. So I was very, very lucky with that. Last thing I'll say is, you should all come visit. If you want to understand how the Silicon Valley ecosystem works, it's best to observe it in person. And come through an accelerator, come to 500, but come and see how this works, because I think the culture of sharing that we have in the Bay Area is really kind of unique in the world. And with that, I will thank you.